Well, our constitutional democracy is at risk of coming under attack and could fail due to inequality. This is the warning from President Cyril Ramaphosa. He spoke at a constitutional conference in Midrand today. The conference hearing from representatives of government, the judiciary, parliament and civil society and some of the drafters of the constitution. They all say the state of our nation represents a threat to the constitution and its legitimacy. Our reporter Govan Whittles was at Midrand. He joins us now. Govan, good afternoon to you. What does the President say about the Constitution and how it's currently being implemented?
Well, he still believes that the proper implementation of the Constitution depends on good governance, not only from the executive, from his office, he says, but all the way down to local government, but says even then it isn't enough. What you would require is the full support of the citizenry, as well as proper accountability being held or being practiced by the legislatures. But really it's his comment on the constitutional project in South Africa. That's really what South Africa's democracy is known as around the world. The project, the constitutional project, which emerged out of the apartheid era, which subscribes to one of the most progressive Bill of Rights in the world, that's heralded around the world. And the President saying here that the rate of inequality, the persistent inequality, represents such a grave threat to the constitutional project that if it persists, it could fail. That's the comment from the President, but he still maintains that that won't happen because of the instruments that the Constitution has created, the institutions which exist for the implementation of the Constitution. And at its heart, the President believes it's a transformative document which has aspirations, but those aspirations need to be reached through the practicing of some of those values enshrined in the Constitution. A lot of theory, you know, and a lot of reaching for the dream that South Africa could be, but certainly this constitutional conference reflecting on the Constitution has been about the fact that it's under threat, that young people don't necessarily feel the need to defend it because of inequality. And let's listen to what the President had to say about it.
The Constitution correctly recognizes that to advance this transformational promise, all spheres of government and all organs of state are required to provide effective, transparent, accountable, as well as coherent governments.
President Cyril Ramaphosa talking about the transformative nature of the Constitution. The Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, hosting this conference essentially. And this is one of the events where the Minister of Justice is able to essentially demonstrate what his department has done in enhancing how the Constitution is taken to the public, how they engage with the public to not only encourage people to learn about the Constitution, inform them about the rights that are enshrined to them through the Constitution, but what his department believes the Constitution's role should be in everyday life and how it should be influencing not only how government rolls out essentially ANC party policy, but how the people's service delivery is enhanced by the Constitution. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
May the conversations over the next 3 days be robust, constructive, and forward-looking, and give us a guide for the next 25 years of the continuous development of the Constitution. Because constitutional democracy is not static, it's an evolving document. We need to continue with this development to guarantee its sustainability and to continue with the project of a constitutional democracy.
Govan, in a way, if you listen to the Justice Minister and the President, they're both referring to the same concept, the idea that the Constitution is what as drafters call, it's a bit philosophical for a Wednesday afternoon, but an aspirational document. In other words, this is where we want to go, we're not there yet. And you could argue the provision of electricity is a great example of that. You have a right to electricity, you don't always have it. And maybe it's just clearly the complete failure of the implementation is the problem. The state that we're in is not a constitutional state a lot of the time.
That's exactly the significance of this conversation 25 years after the Constitution was first adopted, is that the conversation has moved on from heralding how great South Africa's Constitution is to acknowledging that they're now facing a situation where the populace, at least 1/3 of the populace is under the age of 14. If you include people under the age of 35, That's 2/3 of the population. Right now, some of the drafters of the Constitution, Vali Musa among them, he represents Constitution Hill at the moment, warning that in 10 years it'll be up to these young people to decide whether they're going to reject the Constitution or rise up to defend it. And he believes the greatest priority right now for South Africa is to teach people about why the Constitution needs to be preserved, why these rights need to be fought for and protected, and move the conversation along from saying that this is the best constitution or among the best in the world to saying this is why the Constitution needs to be preserved, developed, and protected. They seem really concerned about this, Stephen. It's something that even the former public protector, Thuli Madonsela, acknowledged on the stage today in a public panel discussion, saying that she doesn't expect the young people to defend the Constitution. That's quite a statement, and it shows how urgent this conversation is at the reflections on the Constitution 25 years later. Let's listen to what Thuli Madonsela had to say about the conversation around this being one of the best constitutions in the world versus what should be done.
It is true that we have one of the best constitutions in the world. But as was said by the first video that has been done by Constitution Hill, constitutions are not self-executing documents.
I think, Govan, you really have a sort of sense of frustration, don't you? I think it's probably a sense of frustration shared by everyone that the Constitution is supposed to look after, to protect, and also to impose obligations on. But the point is that, in a way, the sense of frustration, I think, is felt by so many people.
Indeed, and what's interesting about this is that that sense of frustration manifested itself at that national shutdown. One of the moments there, Stephen, Zwanele Manyi, really someone who's known to nitpick at South Africa's Constitution, going up onto the stage saying to the marchers, I want you to tell me whether you like the Constitution or whether you believe it's worked for you. And in many ways it's an unfair question, but that kind of question speaks to the heart of the frustration which is being felt by many people, because it resonates with people, because they're looking for a piece of legislation to blame. And the other end of this conference on reflections of the Constitution involved reflections by some of the lawyers, the senior legal teams, or really senior legal minds, such as Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, who are reflecting on whether or not the government has used the full provisions enshrined in the Constitution. That's another strong debate emerging, particularly around land, where the argument has always been that the Constitution does allow for the expropriation of land without compensation, but it just hasn't been taken up to the full extent. So the frustration is not only being felt by the everyman on the street who is not necessarily seeing a better life translated from that Constitution, but also by the lawyers who believe that this could be taken a lot further than it is being taken in law. And essentially what you have is people trying to change it without using it fully or using it to the full extent.
Govan Whittles, thank you very much indeed. Well, there's a 3-day conference. I'm sure a lot more is going to come in the next little while.